Janelle J. Alvarez adjusted her worn knitted beanie, a faded blue, for what felt like the 100th time that morning. The head covering felt scratchier than it should, pulling stares from other students as she made her way down the twisting passages of Crestwood Academy. Her bright green eyes stayed glued to the scuffed tile floor below her, measuring the distance to her first period biology class. Barely 5'4", with a slight build often swallowed by baggy hoodies, Jay was a master of blending into the background. The school hallways vibrated with the usual midweek chaos as students slammed their book bags on the floor and yelled greetings across the way. Jay tightened her grip on her beat-up canvas backpack, threading her way through noisy packs of chatting friends who barely registered her presence. She preferred to be unnoticed. Almost half a year had passed since her foster family relocated her from Portland to this sleepy Oregon town, and she still felt like an outsider, a ghost in a machine. "Move it, trash bag!" a voice growled from right behind her. Jay's insides twisted as she identified the tone of Kyler, the Cannon Callahan, the star quarterback of Crestwood's football squad. His perfectly messy brown hair and confident grin made him a natural icon among the students, but his dark brown eyes held a meanness that sent chills up Jay's spine. She sped up her walk, praying to get to her classroom before he could say another word. "I'm talking to you, freak!" Kyler bellowed, his voice echoing through the hall. A bunch of students stopped to look, their conversations quieting down as they caught the scent of conflict. Jay's hands trembled as she reached for her classroom's entry, but Kyler's friend, Preston the Pest Pembroke, moved in front of her, blocking her way. Preston's sandy blonde hair and smirking expression would seem almost friendly, if not for the cruel pleasure gleaming in his eyes. Behind them, Wyatt the Wall Wainwright, the third member of their crew, cracked his knuckles in a scary way. Wyatt stood at least 6'3", with wide shoulders straining the seams of his letter jacket, making him an intimidating sight anywhere. "She's ignoring you, Kai," Preston chuckled, his voice thick with fake sympathy. "That's pretty rude, don't you think?" Kyler stepped closer, his cheap cologne overpowering Jay's senses as he invaded her personal space. "My grandpa stormed Normandy to keep filth like you out of this world," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "The least you could do is show some respect." Jay's heart pounded in her chest, but she kept her voice calm. "I was born in Bend," she said softly, finally meeting his gaze. "I'm an American citizen." "Sure you are," Wyatt rumbled, his deep voice rumbling through the hallway. "And I'm the Emperor of China." The growing crowd of watchers snickered at Wyatt's joke, and Jay felt heat rise to her face. She looked around desperately, hoping to spot a teacher or staff member who might step in, but the adults seemed to be nowhere to be seen. Her biology teacher, Mr. Henderson, stayed behind the closed classroom door, either not knowing what was happening or just ignoring it. "Listen, I don't want any trouble," Jay said, her voice barely audible. "I just want to get to class." Kyler's smile grew wider, revealing perfect white teeth that looked like they belonged in a toothpaste commercial. "Oh, you don't want trouble? Then maybe you should crawl back into whatever hole you came from." The crowd burst into laughter, and Jay felt her face burn with shame. She pushed past Preston and slipped into her biology classroom, leaving behind the sound of Kyler's triumphant laughter. Mr. Henderson looked up from his computer screen, but didn't say anything, turning his attention back to the data spread out before him. As Jay sat down in her usual spot in the back corner of the room, she closed her eyes and tried to calm her breathing. Her guardian's words echoed in her mind. "Fighting is never the answer, kiddo. Turn the other cheek and show them who you are through your actions." If only he knew how impossible that idea was to put into practice when facing daily torment. What her classmates didn't know was that Jay had spent the last 7 years training in Muay Thai under her aunt's instruction. Aunt Maria had been a pro MMA fighter before opening her own gym in Portland, and she'd taught Jay that her small size could be a weapon if she learned to use speed and technique over raw power. Her muscles held the memory of countless hours spent practicing kicks, punches, and clinches, but her guardian's peaceful beliefs had stopped her from ever using those skills outside the training ring. The day went on with its usual mix of classes and uneasy encounters in the halls. During lunch, Jay found her regular spot at an empty table in the quiet corner of the cafeteria, picking at her homemade ramen while watching other students laugh and hang out. She pulled out her dog-eared copy of The Hunger Games and tried to lose herself in the fictional world, but her focus broke when a shadow fell across her table. "What's for lunch, garbage?" Kyla's voice cut through the cafeteria chatter like a razor. "Planning to poison the school with that nasty food?" Preston and Wyatt stood next to him on either side, their eyes shining with anticipation. A few tables nearby turned to look at the unfolding scene, their conversations fading away as they sensed a show coming. Jay looked up from her book, her green eyes meeting Kyla's cold stare. "It's ramen," she said calmly. "Would you like to try some?" Her unexpected answer caught Kyla off guard for a moment, but he quickly recovered. "I don't eat rat poison," he spat, grabbing her plastic container and dumping its contents across the table. Noodles, broth, and seaweed scattered across the surface, sauce dripping onto her jeans. The smell of soy sauce hung in the air, the cafeteria filled with gasps and nervous giggles. Jay stared at the mess, her hands clenching into fists under the table. She could feel the weight of dozens of eyes on her, waiting to see how she would react. Part of her wanted to unleash 7 years of combat training on Kyla's smug face, but her guardian's voice whispered in her ear, "We are better than this, kiddo. Show them our strength through peace." "That was uncalled for," Jay said quietly, starting to clean up the mess with napkins from her bag. Kyla laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the now silent cafeteria. "Oh, I'm sorry. Did I hurt your feelings? Maybe you should call your mummy to come pick you up." "Leave her alone, Kyla." The voice came from across the cafeteria, and Jay looked up to see Maya Sanchez walking toward their table. Maya's dark curly hair bounced as she walked, her brown eyes flashing with anger. She was one of the few students who had ever shown Jay any kindness, often sharing smiles and quick talks about their shared love of anime. "Well, well," Preston grinned, his smirking face lighting up with evil glee. "If it isn't Saint Maya, coming to save the day." Maya reached their table and put a protective hand on Jay's shoulder. "I said leave her alone. She hasn't done anything to you." Kyla's expression changed, his attention now focused on Maya with predatory interest. "You know, Maya, I never took you for a loser lover. Maybe you need to rethink the company you keep. And maybe you need to rethink being a complete jerk," Maya shot back, her voice rising above the cafeteria's whispers. The tension in the air grew thick enough to cut with a knife. Jay watched in horror as Kyla's face darkened with rage, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. She had accidentally dragged Maya into her nightmare, and the guilt weighed heavily in her stomach. "You've got quite a mouth on you," Kyla said, stepping closer to Maya. "Maybe someone should teach you some manners." Before Jay could react, Wyatt reached out and grabbed Maya's arm, his large hand easily circling her wrist. "Yeah, maybe we should teach both of you ladies about respect." The cafeteria fell completely silent now, every eye focused on the unfolding fight. Jay felt something break inside her chest, a string that had been pulled tight for months, finally snapping. But before she could do anything, Mrs. Davis, the lunch supervisor, appeared at their table. "What's going on here?" the older woman asked, her white hair pulled back in a tight bun that matched her stern look. "Nothing, Mrs. Davis," Kyla said smoothly, his charming smile returning instantly. "Just having a friendly chat with our new classmate." Mrs. Davis's eyes swept over the mess on the table, but she seemed to accept Kyla's explanation without question. Well, clean up this mess and get back to your seats. Lunch is almost over. As the supervisor walked away, Kyler leaned down close to Jay's ear. This isn't over, freak, and next time your little friend won't be here to save you. The trio walked away laughing, leaving Jay and Maya alone at the ruined table. Maya helped gather the scattered napkins, her hands shaking slightly with lingering anger. "I'm sorry," Jay whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I never wanted to drag you into this." Maya looked up, her brown eyes soft with understanding. "You didn't drag me into anything. I chose to speak up because it was the right thing to do." She paused, studying Jay's face. "But why don't you ever fight back? I've seen you in gym class. You're stronger than you look." Jay's heart skipped a beat. How had Maya seen something that everyone else missed? "I don't believe in fighting," she said carefully. "My guardian taught me that there are better ways to solve problems." Maya nodded slowly, but something in her expression suggested she sensed there was more to the story. "Well, maybe some problems need a different kind of answer." The rest of the afternoon passed in a haze of classes and watchful stares. Word of the cafeteria event had spread throughout the school, and Jay found herself the target of whispered words and pointed looks. Some students seemed supportive, while others seemed to see her as an outsider who had gotten what she deserved. As the final bell rang, Jay hurried to her locker, eager to leave the building and find comfort in her foster family's home. She spun the combination lock with practiced ease, her mind already set on the quiet evening ahead. But as she opened the metal door, a folded piece of paper fluttered to the ground. Her hands shook as she unfolded the note, reading the mean message scrawled in black marker, "Get out of our school before we make you." Jay's vision blurred as tears threatened to spill over. She crumpled the note in her fist and shoved it deep into her backpack, not wanting anyone to see the proof of her humiliation. The hallway around her seemed to spin as she fought to keep her composure, but the weight of months of abuse finally became too much to bear. She slammed her locker shut and hurried toward the exit, pushing through groups of students who seemed to part like the sea before her. The cool autumn air hit her face as she burst through the school's front doors, giving brief relief from the stifling mood inside. But her escape was short-lived. Kyler's voice carried across the parking lot like a warning. "Hey, weirdo, wait up!" Jay's feet moved faster across the asphalt, her backpack bouncing against her back with each rushed step. She could hear footsteps behind her, getting closer despite her best efforts to outrun them. The school bus had already left, leaving her stuck in the parking lot with no way out. "I said wait up!" Kyler's hand grabbed her shoulder, spinning her around to face him and his always-present friends. Preston and Wyatt formed a half-circle around her, cutting off any escape paths. Other students started to gather, forming a loose ring around the fight like fans at a sports match. Jay saw Maya pushing through the crowd, her face filled with worry. "What do you want?" Jay asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Kyler's smile held no kindness as he reached into his backpack and pulled out a can of spray paint. "I think it's time you learned to show some respect for the school that took you in," he said, shaking the can in front of her face. "Why don't you tag yourself and thank us for letting you stay?" The crowd murmured with anticipation, some students pulling out their phones to record the humiliation. Jay felt her cheeks burn with shame as she knew this moment would probably be shared across social media in minutes. "I'm not going to do that," she said quietly, her green eyes meeting Kyler's dark ones without flinching. Kyler's expression darkened. "Oh, I think you are. Unless you want things to get worse for you and your little friend over there." He nodded toward Maya, who was trying to push through the crowd to reach them. Wyatt stepped forward and grabbed Maya's arm, pulling her into the circle with surprising force. "Let her go," Jay said, her voice gaining strength. "This is between you and me." Preston laughed, his smirking face twisted with amusement. "Oh, but she made it our business when she decided to defend you. Maybe she needs to learn about respect too." Kyler reached toward Jay's beanie, his fingers brushing against the faded blue fabric. "You know what? I think this thing is ugly. Maybe you should take it off and show everyone what you're hiding under there." The crowd gasped as Kyler's hand moved closer to her head covering. Jay felt something important shift inside her, like a dam breaking under too much pressure. Every lesson her guardian had taught her about peace and forgiveness crumbled in the face of this final attack. "Don't touch me," she said, her voice carrying a dangerous edge that made Kyler pause. But his hesitation lasted only a moment. With a cruel laugh, he grabbed the edge of her beanie and pulled, the fabric sliding across her hair as he tried to remove it completely. Time seemed to slow as Jay felt her head covering being torn away. The violation was complete, the last line crossed beyond any hope of return. In that moment, 7 years of Muay Thai training surged through her muscles like a jolt of lightning, and her guardian's voice was replaced by her aunt's rough words. "When peaceful answers fail, you defend yourself with everything you have." Jay's hand shot up and caught Kyler's wrist in a tight grip, her fingers finding the pressure point that made him release her beanie with a sharp gasp. Her other hand formed a precise strike that connected with his chest, driving the air from his lungs and sending him staggering backward. The crowd exploded in shocked gasps as Kyler doubled over, clutching his chest and struggling to breathe. Preston and Wyatt stared in disbelief, unable to understand what they had just seen. "Holy crap!" someone whispered from the crowd. "Did you see that?" Jay calmly adjusted her beanie, her green eyes never leaving Kyler's face as he slowly straightened up. Her stance had changed completely, her previous slumped posture replaced by the confident bearing of a trained fighter. "I told you not to touch me," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the silent parking lot. Kyler's face flushed red with rage and embarrassment. "You little bitch," he snarled, lunging toward her with his fist raised. But Jay was ready. She sidestepped his clumsy attack with smooth grace, her right hand deflecting his punch, while her left kicked his extended leg. The joint bent with a sickening crack, and Kyler screamed in pain as he crashed to the asphalt. Preston rushed forward next, his face twisted with fury. "You broke his leg!" Jay ducked under his wild swing and drove her knee into his stomach, following up with an elbow strike to his back that sent him sprawling beside his friend. The crowd pressed closer, their phones recording every moment of the amazing turn of events. Wyatt, the largest of the three, approached more carefully. His size advantage was clear, but something in Jay's eyes made him hesitate. She had changed from a shy victim into something altogether more dangerous. "Come on, Wyatt," she said, her voice calm and controlled. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Wyatt charged forward with a roar, his massive frame bearing down on her like a truck. But Jay had been trained to fight opponents twice her size. She dropped low and swept his legs, using his own weight against him as he crashed to the ground with earth-shaking force. The parking lot fell completely silent, except for the groans of the 3 defeated bullies. Jay stood over them, her beanie perfectly in place, and her breathing barely elevated. She looked around at the stunned faces of her classmates, seeing a mix of fear, respect, and wonder in their eyes. Maya broke free from the crowd and rushed to Jay's side, her brown eyes wide with shock. "Where did you learn to fight like that?" Jay's expression softened as she looked at the girl who had risked herself to defend her. "My aunt taught me," she said simply. "I never wanted to use it, but they left me no choice." Kyler struggled to his feet, cradling his injured leg against his chest. His face was pale with pain and humiliation, but his eyes still burned with hatred. "This isn't over," he gasped. "You'll pay for this." Jay stepped forward, her movement causing Kyler to flinch backward. "Yes, it is over," she said quietly. "You've bullied me for months, and I let you because I believed in solving problems peacefully. But when you touched my beanie, When you threatened Maya, you crossed a line that can't be uncrossed." She looked around at the gathered crowd, her voice carrying to every corner of the parking lot. "I never wanted to hurt anyone, but I won't be anyone's victim anymore. If you leave me alone, I'll leave you alone. But if you come after me or my friends again, what happened today will seem like a gentle warning." The crowd began to disperse, students walking away in small groups while whispering excitedly about what they had seen. Several approached Jay with newfound respect, offering words of support and admiration for her courage. As the parking lot emptied, Maya remained by Jay's side, her expression thoughtful. "I'm sorry you had to go through all of this," she said, "but I'm also glad you finally stood up for yourself." Jay nodded, feeling a strange mix of relief and sadness. "My guardian won't be happy when he hears about this," she said. "He believes that fighting only makes more fighting." Maya put a gentle hand on her arm. "Sometimes fighting is the only language bullies understand. You gave them every chance to leave you alone, and they chose to make it worse instead." As they walked toward the street together, Jay thought about the day's events. She had spent months trying to be invisible, hoping that if she didn't cause trouble, the bullying would eventually stop. But she had learned that some people saw kindness as weakness, and that sometimes the only way to gain respect was to demand it. The next morning, Jay entered Crestwood Academy with her head held high and her beanie proudly in place. Students parted before her in the hallways, but now it was out of respect rather than indifference. A bunch of classmates approached her throughout the day, some to offer friendship and others to share their own stories of being bullied. Kyla, Preston, and Wyatt were noticeably absent from school, though rumors spread that Kyla's leg was in a cast and all three were facing suspension for their part in the event. Mr. Henderson, her biology teacher, pulled Jay aside after class to say he was sorry for not stepping in sooner. "I should have done something," the older man said, his eyes filled with guilt. "I knew what was happening, but I chose to look the other way. That was wrong of me." Jay accepted the apology kindly, understanding that change had to start somewhere. The school had suddenly become very interested in putting in place anti-bullying rules, and a number of teachers had reached out to talk about creating a more friendly place for all students. Maya found her at lunch, sitting down in the seat across from her with a warm smile. "How are you feeling about everything?" she asked. Jay thought about the question carefully. "Different," she said finally. "I still don't like fighting, and I hope I never have to use those skills again. But I'm not going to say sorry for defending myself and protecting you." Maya's cheeks flushed slightly at the mention of protection, and something changed in the air between them. "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday," she went on, "about your aunt teaching you to fight. Would you maybe want to teach me some basic self-defense? I never want to feel that helpless again." Jay's face lit up with the first real smile she'd worn in months. "I'd like that," she said. "My aunt always said that the best way to stop fighting is to be ready for it." As the weeks passed, Jay found herself settling into a new role at Crestwood Academy. She was no longer the invisible girl who tried to avoid attention, but she hadn't become a bully either. Instead, she had earned something far more valuable: respect. Other students began coming to her when they faced their own bullying situations, asking for advice and support. She formed a small group of friends who met regularly to practice self-defense and talk about ways to deal with harassment. Maya became her closest friend, and their friendship slowly grew into something deeper. Kyla and his friends returned to school after their suspension, but they gave Jay a wide space. The humiliation of being beaten by someone they had seen as an easy target had taken away their confidence, and they seemed to have learned that their actions had results. One afternoon, as Jay was leaving school, she found Kyla waiting by her locker. His leg was still in a cast, and his usual proud look had been replaced by something that looked almost like shame. "I wanted to say sorry," he said quietly, his eyes focused on the floor. What I did was wrong. The things I said, the way I treated you, it was not okay. Jay studied his face, searching for signs of truth. Why now? She asked. Why say sorry after all this time? Kyla's jaw tightened, and for a moment she thought he might go back to his old behavior, but then his shoulders dropped with defeat. Because you were right, he said. I was a bully, and I hurt people because I thought it made me look strong. But you showed me what real strength looks like. He looked up at her then, his dark eyes lacking their former coldness. I know you have no reason to forgive me, but I wanted you to know that I'm sorry, and I'm trying to be better. Jay felt the last of her anger fade away, replaced by something she hadn't expected. Pity. Kyla had been so focused on showing strength that he had never learned what it actually meant to be strong. Thank you for saying sorry, she said simply. I hope you mean it. Kyla nodded and walked away, leaving Jay alone with her thoughts. She knew now that her change wasn't just about learning to fight back physically. It was about finding the courage to stand up for what was right, even when it was hard. As she walked home through the crisp autumn air, Jay thought about the trip that had brought her to this moment. She had learned that turning the other cheek was noble, but there came a time when standing up for yourself and others was the only moral choice. The trick was knowing the difference between defending yourself and becoming the bully. Her phone buzzed with a text from Maya. Movie night at my place? I'll make popcorn and we can practice those new moves you showed me. Jay smiled as she typed back her answer. I'll be there. And Maya? Thank you for standing up for me that day in the cafeteria. It meant more than you know. The reply came quickly. We stand up for each other. That's what friends do. As Jay tucked her phone away and sped up her walk toward home, she felt a sense of peace that had been missing for months. She had found her voice, her strength, and her place in the world. Most importantly, she had learned that true courage wasn't about avoiding conflict. It was about facing it with dignity and knowing when to fight and when to forgive. The girl who had once tried to make herself invisible now walked with purpose, her faded blue beanie catching the afternoon sunlight like a beacon of hope. She had learned that respect couldn't be given freely. Sometimes it had to be earned through action, courage, and the willingness to stand up for what was right. Crestwood Academy would never be the same, and neither would Janelle Alvarez. She had found her strength not in spite of her differences, but because of them. And in doing so, she had taught everyone around her that true power came not from tearing others down, but from building them up and standing together against injustice. The change was complete, but the trip was just starting.